And I think we are on chapter 10 of Matthew. But if I am wrong, I would be happy to be corrected.
Charity, I was just thinking last week we were talking a little bit about miracles and what they show us, and I was just doing a little more thinking, and different gospels have different perspectives and different ways of looking at miracles. But I think one of the things that the miracles in Matthew are showing us, I thought through three aspects, basically. Of course, the fact that and when Jesus is doing these miracles, it shows his power, but also it shows his compassion, his love, his affirmation of the oppressed, because it's primarily among the oppressed, and we see these things happening, and that these miracles, these healings, are more than just healings, but they're actually restorations. They bring these people back into society because of their illnesses. That particular time, they were completely separated from society. So it's not just a physical thing, but it enables them to once again become members of the whole society. So I just thought I'd share that with you in terms of what I
Thank
was
you.
thinking.
I appreciate, in particular, that, because you all have helped me to feel part of things, and it's true that people who, it's hard to be apart, but I think it's good to be reminded that that isn't something just in the past. I mean, throughout the Bible, there are examples, and thank you for saying that.
Yeah, thank you, David. I last week Leslie had pointed out that several of these, what Greg would call the healing montage, several of these are women, and this idea that women really weren't, at the time you couldn't own property, you couldn't really have any rights, and that for him to focus on these people who are at the bottom of society and give them, if not a name, at least give them a place in the story.
Actually, I'd kind of like to go back to 9 for a minute.
I'd love to do that, Dawn. There's so much here.
And it's the last part of it, and I'm reading it out. What is that? 18. But it's the last before Kingdom Come, where later when Jesus was eating supper at Matthew's house with his followers, a lot of disreputable characters came and joined them. When the Pharisees saw him keeping this kind of company, they had a fit and lit into Jesus's followers. What kind of example is this setting from your teacher? Acting cozy with crooks and misfits. Jesus, overhearing, shot back, "Who needs a doctor? The healthy or the sick? Go figure out what that scripture means. I'm after mercy, not religion. I'm here to invite outsiders, not coddle insiders."
I love that. And mine says, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." And I think that's just stunning. What were your thoughts
on? Well, you're right. Who needs, as Greg's pointed out, the least and the lowest of us? And yeah, just kind of they're judging him, and he's right. Who needs a doctor more, a sick person or a healthy person? And the other line I like is, become what you believe.
What verses are those?
That looks like 10 through 13 of 9. It's the last 2 paragraphs.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, and there it is.
And that become what you believe. I have to realize that, you belief in yourself is you got to have it. Lots of times there's not confidence, but become what you believe.
What verse is that?
That is, I'm looking at 23. As Jesus left the house, he was followed by the two blind men crying out, "Mercy, Son of David, mercy on us." "Do you really believe I can do this?" They said, "Why, yes, Master." He touched their eyes and said, "Become but what you believe." And it happened.
I love that. Mine says, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." I love both versions of that.
What verse is that?
That would be, so we're still in chapter 9, and that would be verse 29.
Oh, 29. Okay.
Hmm.
In regard to what Don was saying about Call of Matthew, there's a meme that I've seen a lot about people talking about why Jesus spent time with sinners and outcasts, and he didn't spend it because he was trying to justify what they were doing or enable them, but just so that they would be forgiven and change their lives. And I think if you look at it in terms of mercy rather than sacrifice, that kind of puts a different spin on this whole thing, rather than Jesus wasn't just there to straighten people up and make them live according to a certain code, a certain religious code, but he was there because he cared about them and he was showing mercy and care. And that's more important than, and as it was put, sacrifice was in Dawn's version, it was, they called it religion because that was the religion of the day. The central part of the Jewish religion was, of course, sacrifice. So that's a good synonym, I think. Anyway.
Don, I'm sorry I muted you just because we were getting a little bit of weird noise. But please
That's
unmute.
fine.
Sorry
That's
about
fine.
that. Sometimes we get a little weird background noise that pops up. Yeah, I remember when I've talked to you about this before, but I went through a period in my own life where I was like, I don't know if it was a crisis of faith, but I went to like an Inquirer's class through my old church in San Diego, just like, and I was kind of like, I don't know, can you convince me that this is really anything I should be doing? And we went through the book of Matthew then. This is maybe the third time I've gone through it with a group. And we got to this part where he's having dinner with the sinners and the tax collectors. And then I left and I looked at the pastor and I'm like, that's what you think you're doing here, isn't it? And he kind of, I was like, you would rather be in your group of believers where everyone thinks like you do, but instead you invited all of us to your house to challenge you and say things that are probably offensive to you, and you're there to kind of take it and love us anyway. And he kind of laughed and he's like, well, I mean, not on purpose, but and I was like, that's kind of the only way you reach people. If you have dinner just with the people that think just like you do, and David, we talked about this on Sunday just a little bit, this idea of going out into the community and table fellowship and not just being in your own little building where you're comfortable. Jesus, I don't think, is big on being comfortable.
Situations where I would think he's not comfortable.
Well, he makes me uncomfortable. Is there anything else we'd like to talk about in 9? I could spend weeks just on all the things here. Or should we move into 10? And if we move into, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I was done with 9. Just a couple that I hadn't brought up before, and then reading it again, it stood out to me.
I get so much out of this every time I read it. It's just so rich and dense. If we'd like to move on, do I have anyone who would volunteer to read? Oh, wonderful.
What am I reading?
Not the whole thing because it's pretty long, but maybe like either to 16 or 26. Depends on how. Those are where mine have little sections to stop. Just see how it feels.
Okay. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings, and for my sake as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of the Father who speaks for you. Now brother will deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in this city, flee to another, for assuredly I say to you, you will not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher, and a servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call those of his household?
Wow. Okay, I'm just gonna stop you because I think I was very confusing when I said to go to 16. We were starting just at the beginning at 10. Do
Oh,
you mind starting at 1 and then going to 16 and then we'll
Oh.
just take it all like that?
hey, sure.
No, sorry, that was it's on me. I apologize.
And when he had called,
They put these things out of order sometimes. It's just good practice.
and when he called his 12 disciples to him, he gave them power over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, who was called Peter, Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, go ahead.
These 12 Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying, do not go into the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter a city of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Provide neither gold nor silver nor copper in your money belts, nor bag for your journey, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staffs, for a worker is worthy of his food. Now, whatever city or town you enter, inquire who in it is worthy, and stay there till you go out. And when you go into a household, greet it. If a household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart from that city or house or city, take off the dust from your feet. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city. And I've already read the rest.
Thank you. What do people think? There's a lot going on here. We met people, they got their mission, they got sent out. It was very condensed, very action packed here. What struck people?
Go to the lowest. Go,
Go to the
don't go the, big houses and stuff like that. Go to the common people. That's what I kind of got out of it.
I think it's interesting that
I'm
you know,
sorry.
preach, like God will speak through you. Go to these places if they want to hear it, let them hear it. But if they don't force it upon them.
Yep.
Which I think is interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was in a Bible study once and we talked for an hour about that line.
Yeah.
Because in the group I was in, it meant if people won't hear the message of Christ, you have to cut them out of your lives.
Yeah.
Like if your children aren't believers, or if they do things you disagree with, like have the wrong gender or sexual orientation, you need to cut them out. Shake the dust off your cloak and be done with them. And I was listening and I thought, well, maybe it's an issue of consent.
Mm-hmm.
The way I read it, and I'm wondering if I have more people who agree with me here. I was all alone in that little group of good people, but alone in my thoughts. The way I read it was, if people want to hear you, then speak to them. But if they're saying no, then you respect their autonomy.
That's how
don't
yeah.
push things on them without their consent. So I felt like that's kind of what you were saying.
Yeah,
now.
that's how I would feel upon it. Respect their
I
wishes.
think it's I think it's similar to what we've seen in another passage where earlier on where we were talking about out of the nowhere, what he was talking about in no judgment, don't judge, and out of that then he talks about people that don't cast your pearls before swine, and I think it's very similar to that. That struck me here. It also struck me that as he's sending the 12 out here, they're not supposed to take anything. They're just going out there. In other places later on, we'll see that Jesus tells them to take provisions. And I think this is a particular mission at a particular time too. Something else to be considered in this is where Jesus' kingdom is just breaking out, and his first ministry is to the Jews, the Israel, and then later we'll go to Gentiles as well. But this is very much a special situation. The first time Jesus sends them out quite early, and so some special conditions apply, I guess.
Thank you. David, you're always so good about making sure we are grounded in the context. Thank you.
Did they ever mention what it was that they would talk about, like what the apostles talked about? Because I always wondered, especially for the first time, what were they telling these people other than like the kingdom of heaven is at hand? I mean, details.
They're telling them blind see, lame walk, that kind of things, that Jesus is reaching out and he's healing people and he's healing the oppressed I think you're right, that the new kingdom is here. Exactly. Yeah.
I was thinking about how they must have felt hearing that. I mean, that's a pretty big bunch of things to say that were their journey. And I don't know if that's the first time they've heard all that kind of thing, but I mean, it's a big deal. What he's telling them is their ministry, I think so anyway.
And so the apostles would work miracles through God and Jesus there also. I always wondered, like, did people not get confused or, like saying John healed the sick or made the blind man, it's like, I know they didn't really emphasize it much, but you would just think for the time and back then, like I would be like, oh, well, it wasn't you, it was this other guy we haven't seen yet.
Right. Then suddenly it's like, instead of Christianity, it's Matthewanity or something, right?
Yeah.
Because that's who you saw and had access to.
Yeah. So I've always just wondered that,
Yeah.
Well, it does say, it does say in later on in the part you read first, when they go to speak, they don't know what they're going to say until, probably they pray and then the Lord is giving them the words as they speak. And so so they're not told what to say ahead of time. They're told what to say on the spot. And that's hard for me sometimes, because I know if you don't think through what you're going to say, especially in a sermon or something, you might be giving out information that is a little bit not true, not right or whatever, if you're trying to, I don't know. I just have a hard time with having to wait to be told what to say, if you're going out and preaching.
That's what the Quakers do, Quaker silence. My husband and I were part of a Quaker group for over a year, and that's what they believe, is that you you shake and you have to speak, and I agree with you, Leslie, that I think that's very hard to know that.
Oh, David, you're still muted. Oh, sorry.
One thing I'd point out is that in distinction with some of the groups that I've been associated with before, that came out of the revivalist tradition, there's no indication that they were going around preaching turn or burn. So it's more a message of compassion and love and sharing that Jesus has come and has brought this new kingdom where that, that this kind of grace and love is being demonstrated to everyone, even the most, the lowest part of society, the part that no one else cared for. So I think, yeah, this is, like I say, these are unique circumstances, kind of like this is the first sending out of the apostles, and it was kind of like Pentecost. I don't think there was a script yet. They didn't have the Bible to depend on. They didn't have anything to study. These were unique circumstances, and I think in these circumstances, perhaps the Spirit worked through them uniquely. So.
I don't mean to keep harping on the Richard Rohr seminar I've been listening to, but he talks about this passage in that if you had no possessions and no money and you went out among the poor in society, they would need to invite you into their home and feed you. That's like what you'd have to do to live. And at that point, you are indebted to them. So then you can speak to them not as someone in a power level above them, but you can speak to them from a power level below them because you have been dependent on their hospitality and their food. And he talks a lot about how you can't build the kingdom from a position of power. You can only reach out from a position of powerlessness. And that's where he would argue that this is what this is about. Don't put money in your belt. Don't bring an extra cloak. Go out with nothing, because then you're dependent on the grace and mercy of the people around you. And only from there can you start to build relationships. And it made me think a lot about sort of the power dynamic and how do you reach out to people who, because this whole thing in my reading of it, at least, is that you're trying to reach out and lift up the people at the bottom, that we're turning things upside down. And he then goes on, and for those of you not familiar with Richard Rohr, he's a Franciscan, he's a Catholic, to talk about how we've built cathedrals and we sit inside and then we decide who can come in and out. And we like talk to them from a gold altar, and we look down and say, you can come and you can't. And it's his own, church he's talking about, but how different it would be if you had to go live with nothing among the people that you think you're trying to help.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's
I really
like
like that.
big ask. Go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
I just said I really like that. I like a lot of the things Richard has to say. Yeah, I like that a lot.
I was thinking about, I also had an experience with Plymouth Brethren, the boy that I was supposedly in love with. I mean, I was at the time. He brought me to a Plymouth Brethren meeting that he was part of. And they, they're very closed. And when I was there, when they passed something like communion or something around in a basket, and they passed it right over me. I mean, I wasn't allowed to, be part of it. And I suppose there are lots of groups that would feel that way towards somebody new, not that they were reaching out to them, but this person doesn't belong. And that wasn't a very good feeling on my part.
When my sister's first husband passed away a number of years ago, I went to the funeral, and he was Catholic and my sister was not. But my sister was allowed to take communion at the funeral because of her being his spouse, but I could not. And so whenever they came and did this communion, I had to just cross my hands and be blessed, because we were in a Catholic, I believe we were in a Catholic church. So, but it it makes you feel, because I've always taken communion. I grew up as Episcopalian, and then I, went to other churches, and I just always did. Of course, I was an adult by then, but it does make you feel an outcast. And you're different, but it was fine, you know, you don't learn, you learn to just do what they tell you to do, because I wasn't going to be going to that church anyway. It was just for a one-off thing. So
I know my mom is of the feeling that no one should be turned away from the Lord's table. And I
Yeah.
get it. I get it. Because that's just making, that's a separation. It's supposed to bring us all together, not separate us.
Well, I think Greg would be agreeing if he was
Mhm.
here. I don't think that's too big of a reach to say he's made his opinion.
on me again.
Oh, who's,
I was just, yeah, that, and the feeling that some of us have had where we've been in places where we're not welcome to sharing communion is the exact opposite of what, Richard Rohr was sharing here, that it rather than coming as over the top and, you've got to qualify to be part, but ministering to people from the bottom and saying, I'm not coming from a position of power, but I'm coming with nothing, and trying to just sharing the good news with you, and even being indebted to them. That's a whole different attitude of service. And the more I think about that, the more I like that. That's really insightful.
but like what Mary was saying, saying you're going to go out powerless like sheep into the wolves. That's a scary thing to ask someone to do. I mean, I think I get nervous just volunteering to read in a safe church with people I know, and to go out literally penniless and leave everything and to know you're going to be persecuted. That's huge.
At least you know.
And
though,
when
tell you what to say.
Yeah.
You didn't have to prepare
and when he's I'm trying to remember where it was. When they don't be upset when they haul you before the civil authorities without knowing it. They have done you and me a favor, giving you a platform for preaching the kingdom news.
Yeah. We don't really do that as much here, but I don't know if anyone's come from a tradition where you give testimony or you like speak in front of people and kind of tell your own personal story. But I had a friend once who said, like, the only thing you have to do before you speak is pee and pray. Like, go to the bathroom, make sure you take care of that, and then pray, and then let God say what he wants to say through you. And so I think this idea of let God speak through you is scary, but theoretically something we all have access to. Because, like after Pentecost, we should all be able to do that. But would be scary.
One of the things that I've been sitting here thinking when we read other stories about the apostles, how they didn't get it and Jesus had to tell them a second and third time and that kind of stuff. I just think the evolution of how they've become so much stronger in terms of here now going out without anything and spreading the word. So for me, it was just like he took these ordinary, simple, and I'm not saying simple in a bad way, but simple men, and through his relationship with them and the power, they are now able to spread the word. And I just think that's an incredible feat. I think about, oh my gosh, from these, again, simple men who are now then spreading the good news. The transformation is just amazing. I just find it amazing.
There's an old saying in my tradition, and it probably goes across other traditions as well, that a pastor or preacher should be ready to preach, pray, or die at a moment's notice. But if you look at the tradition, the prophetic tradition, though, in the Old Testament, what Jesus is sending his people out to do with no provisions is something that wasn't without precedent. That's how a lot of the prophets were in the Old Testament. They were dependent on people as they went by for their livelihood. They went shared what God's word was, but very often they were utterly dependent on those around him to provide them sustenance. So it's very much in a prophetic tradition, I think.
And I think, I'm not an expert, but I know that in Buddhism, monks need to go out and ask for alms, not because they necessarily need the money, but to teach them humility, to sit powerless and to be dependent on other people. And that's part of like spiritual training, is to put yourself into that situation. But
Catholic
yeah,
Catholic
that's a
Church, the tradition of poverty, yeah, that a lot of priests take a vow of poverty.
and some of them end up that way even without a vow.
Doesn't have to be priests for that to happen. It's just a lot of priests end up that way, yeah, in smaller churches, yeah.
Should we try
Charity?
Sorry, go ahead, Dawn.
Who is the person that you have been listening to? What's his name again?
Richard Rohr.
Rohr.
R-O-H-R, is that right?
Yeah.
But Dawn,
Okay.
I can send you a link if you want. I've been gifting people. He did a seminar just on Sermon on the Mount. So it's 3 days of sermons. I don't know, 18 hours or something. I listen to it while I read, but it's
Sure.
been,
Send it to me too, please.
I did, Mary. You should have it on your email.
Oh,
If you check your email, there should be a link, but you might need Mindy to help you download the Audible app to listen to it.
okay.
Is that from the Center of Action for Action and Contemplation? Is that the website that comes from, Charity?
I got it on Audible. I can send you the link, David. I'm happy to
That's
share
okay.
it. But yeah, he released it like a listening book, where you can download. I don't know. I usually listen to Mystery or something, but I didn't realize how many hours it was. But I've been enjoying it just because we're reading this and listening to that at the same time. It also makes the reading go faster. But we got 20 minutes. I bet we can finish 10 if anybody would like to read.
I can do message.
Oh, that'd be awesome. So maybe from 26, Whom to Fear. It should say something like, don't be afraid.
Yep.
Okay.
So I'm reading from the Message. Don't be intimidated. Eventually, everything is going to be out in the open, and everyone will know how things really are. So don't hesitate to go public now. Don't be bluffed into silence by the threat of bullies. There's nothing they can do to your soul, your core being. Save your fear for God, who holds your entire life, body and soul in his hands. What's the price of a pet canary? Some loose change, right? And God cares what happens to it even more than you do. He pays even greater attention to you, down to the last detail, even numbering the hairs on your head. So don't be intimidated by all this bully talk. You're worth more than 1 million canaries. Stand up for me against world opinion, and I'll stand up for you before my Father in heaven. If you turn pale and run, do you think I'll cover for you? Don't think I've come to make life cozy. I've come to make a sharp knife cut between son and father, daughter and mother, bride and mother-in-law. Cut through these cozy domestic arrangements and free you for God. Well-meaning family members can be your worst enemies. If you prefer father or mother over me, you don't deserve me. If you prefer son or daughter over me, you don't deserve me. If you don't go all the way with me, through thick and thin, you don't deserve me. If your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. Wow. But if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. We are intimately linked in this harvest work. Anyone who accepts what you do accepts me, the one who sent you. Anyone who accepts what I do accepts my Father who sent me. Accepting a messenger of God is as good as being God's messenger. Accepting someone's help is as good as giving someone's help. This is a large work I've called you into, but don't be overwhelmed by it. It's best to start small. Give a cool cup of water to someone who is thirsty, for instance. The smallest act of giving or receiving makes you a true apprentice. You won't lose out on a thing.
Wow, thank you, Barb.
I love this one line. Let me find it. Here, if you don't go all the way with me through thick and thin, you don't deserve me. If your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. But if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. I like
Barb,
that
what
one.
version of the Bible is that?
And
It's the remix and it's by Eugene Peterson. I don't see if I can.
Message.
It's called The Message, Mary.
can you-
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And I think that line is the same as 39 in the NRSV.
Oh, it
Those
is?
who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. I think it's a rework of that.
Yeah.
But I love the wording in the message.
Yeah, yeah. You'll find both. I like, wow,
Yeah.
that just hit me. That just hit me out of everything today that I read.
And the smallest thing can be considered a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Giving it or receiving it. I love how the
Right.
message emphasizes that.
Yeah.
It's just
I
a-
make sure I take my neighbors, their older women, their garbage cans get out and brought back in. They don't have to do a thing.
Mhm. But I think sometimes it's a lot easier to do for someone else than be willing to accept something from
Right.
someone.
Yes, I
struggle with
agree.
that. It's easy for me to, I don't know, offer to do something or whatever, but when that is turned to me, that's more of a challenge. That's more of a challenge.
I agree, Barb, and I think it's a sign of our our privilege and our pride. And I have the same issue, you know. A lot of us are in positions where we can take that attitude, but then there are those who are oppressed that really can't have that attitude. And to recognize that for them, you know, it's a whole different world. So
That's a good point.
these are really hard passages. These are some of the hard sayings of Jesus where he starts talking about, I've not come to bring peace, or I've come to bring a sword. And some people want to take that literally instead of symbolically. And then also it talks about you need to make sure you don't prefer your father or your mother or your son or your daughter over Jesus. These are tough things. These are tough sayings. It's really, if you think about them carefully, it takes a lot of evaluation, you know, to really look at these properly. I guess he winds it up by implication referring to the same thing, that we love our fathers, our mothers, our brothers and our sisters more effectively, more properly, more as they should be loved, if we love Jesus first, and love them with the love of Jesus as well. But that's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to tell people, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I read it, because in my mind right now, I keep thinking about how uncomfortable so much of this is. And he's saying, I'm not here to make you comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm not here to say, stay home
Yeah.
on the couch with your mom. Like, it's not comfortable. You've got to upend the things that you rely on to feel like everything's good with you, and realize like there's more growth to be had.
Get to learn and grow.
And I don't like it.
No.
I don't like to learn and grow.
But how do you deal with people judging you for you know, telling them, you know, I don't know, because I have in my family some people who, you know, would judge me for doing that, for saying that.
For saying that, what, Mary?
Well, you have to say what you're saying is that um, you're saying that, well, you're not being loving like Jesus. You're not, people might resent that. And um, I don't know what you could say in response to that.
Mary, are you saying that it's difficult for people to understand that you say, I love Jesus more than I love my loved ones? I put him as a priority even over them. That would be a difficult thing for people to understand.
Well, yes, my daughter and son-in-law, my son-in-law has a sister who has become part of some kind of a group and who basically is rejecting him. And, that isn't what Jesus would do. I'm just saying that people can reject what you have to say, and you have to accept that. And I find that hard to do.
Yes.
Well, and I'm putting some words in your mouth, Mary, but I wonder if it's because we think we're right. So therefore
Yeah.
you should what I'm saying. And I'll speak for myself, but yeah, I could see that that's really hard when you feel like you've got the true belief, and somebody's not hearing that or believing it. That's a hard place to be. So we go back earlier when they went out and they had to, talk and as Mike read, where like move on. I'm paraphrasing, but move on to the next person. If they can't hear what you're saying, move on to the next, dust it off and move on. But that's a hard thing to do when we think we got all the answers and we're right. Or I'll speak for myself. It's hard for me to do when I think I have all the answers. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
It is hard. I have a good friend in my quilting group who is very, very outspoken on her conservative ways. And if we start talking about anything that's not, within her wheelhouse, and we start getting a little bit outside there, she's just so judgmental. And so, and I might say something in response to her, and she says, oh, well, it can't be that way because this, and this, and this, and a lot of times I just shut up because it's not worth arguing about semantics about something that to me isn't that important. My friendship with her is more important than her knowing exactly where I stand on certain things. And, and we've talked about a few, and I just find that it's easier to, as Barb said, just move on to the next topic or whatever. Don't, you don't have to, if you want to keep the love and the camaraderie that we have, just move on to some other different. And one of the ladies in the group is always saying, well, what about this? And, we change the subject. So, so anyway.
Thank you.
Sometimes people just aren't in a place where they can hear either. And we have to have sensitivity to that. I think in the background of what is being said here, part of that maybe is that when our people aren't in a position to hear, we shouldn't just try to drum the message into them all the time. We need to just move on and maybe minister to them in other ways.
Or maybe you've planted the seed. They can't really hear it, but maybe you left them with a thought that they can then ruminate on, and it makes sense to them. So, anytime I have a conversation with someone that's believes differently or whatever, I pray and I hope that maybe on some level they can think about what I've said and just leave it at that.
Right. And if you do it with grace, and if you do it with love and you show them love and grace in other ways, maybe, that'll even add more power, more strength, more validity to what you had to say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many of you were here when they did the film that the Episcopal filmmakers, it was called The Case for Love. Mm-hmm. They showed it up here, but they interviewed Secretary Buttigieg.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, whenever I'm arguing with someone who thinks differently than I do, I remember God loves that person exactly as much as he loves me. And it's a short thing to say, but that stuck with me for days. And I just keep thinking, okay, whatever else is going on here, as uncomfortable as I am, or as angry, or as mama bear as I can get from some of these comments, it's just, okay, God loves both of us the same. And to God, we're all the prodigal son. Like, we're all off, like so far off from where we're supposed to be. And he'll wait when we're done eating with the pigs, we can run back to him with no judgment, right? And it's hard though. It's super hard because I want to be right and I want to protect the people I love. And those are hard things. Yeah. Super hard things. But God does it way better than I do. And that's where I try to.
And sometimes if we can remember our own journeys, because I come from a very judgmental kind of religion, and that was the way I was for a long time. And if I can remember, you know, I was there too, and I understand where they're coming from. They're not, in most cases, they're not trying to be difficult. They're just trying to express the faith the way they understand it, and they're trying to hold on by their fingernails, just like I am, you know, so.
Yeah. Aren't we all?
Good point.
Hanging on by our fingernails.
Yeah.
I find it I have recently gotten some friends, and I had been invited to a Pentecostal revival, 3 days. And I'm not sure I'm comfortable. I said, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet to experience something that is probably not as solemn as I'm used to, I guess I would say.
I think that's fair, yeah.
I take it I'm in for an experience, David.
I've been in Pentecostal services. It's a little different than the ordinary Episcopal mass or Episcopal service, yeah.
When David and I were first engaged and we had gone down to Texas to visit my family, it was very interesting because we went to a cowboy meeting out at this ranch, and it was a Pentecostal meeting. And the first half hour or hour, I don't know, I can't remember now all of it, but I just remember Dave and I were very uncomfortable and we left. And while we were leaving, the guy said, "We'll pray for you," or something. I can't remember exactly what he said while we left. We just weren't comfortable there. And so I'll pray for you, Dawn. I'll think about you as you go to this service. And
that was back in my more conservative days. If I were to do it again, I don't think I would have left. But you know, I felt like I had to at that point. But I think at this point, I probably wouldn't have done it the same way. But yeah, it's quite a bit different because there were words of knowledge and prophecy and things going on for the first half an hour, 45 minutes before they even got to the sermon. So it was, yeah, and yeah, it depends on what happens at the Pentecostal service, but yeah, depends on the group. But you could get hugged a lot, and there could be a lot of speaking in tongues and stuff like that, slain in the spirit. It's hard to tell what could happen. So you need to be open to a variety of experiences if you decide to go. It's going to be a lot less formal. Yeah.
I remember.
I'll try anything once, twice if I like it.
I love your words that you used, Dawn. I'm not ready yet, because
Yes,
the teachers on here will say that's what we have. We call a growth mindset. I don't know my sevens multiplication tables yet. I don't know how to read that paragraph yet. Yes. We put yet on everything. So I love your wording. I'm sorry, Mary, I think I interrupted you.
Thank you.
I was just going to say that I had an experience like that, and in those days, I was emotionally vulnerable, and without knowing, I mean, I was in a place like that, and without knowing why, but feeling like this isn't good for me, I got up and left, and there were two men standing at the door, And I said, I'm leaving. I feel that God doesn't want me to continue here or something like that. But man, my heart was beating fast and I just felt very threatened by that. Just tells you the state of myself at those times. But that's a very uncomfortable feeling. And being strong enough to get up and leave, I felt like God was leading me to do that.
I always like to remember that God meets us where we are.
Mhm.
And there's going to be lots of ways to do that for lots of different people. And if that's not it for you, I think he's a creative being who will find other ways to reach
Yeah.
us. And if it works for people, I think that's wonderful. Different people, different times, different ways. So, well, I'm happy to keep talking. It is 11:30, so anyone who wants to leave, we can, unless there's burning desires to say more things. Well, thank you all for putting up with me. I think Greg's back next week. But
You're not second best. Come on.
but I'm here. So if he's not, I am. And
I
We
think
always, we
you're very
always,
good at this.
we appreciate your sensitive, compassionate perspective, Charity. I really do. I always like to hear what you have to say.
oh, it's kind of you guys.
And I
Do you-
do have a question. With Greg gone, who's going to do the Bible study?
Well, I think it'll be me for a while. And unless someone tells me not to. And then
I doubt that.
we'll have an interim priest as soon as the diocese can send somebody. So, but I think a lot of those things are open for discussion and debate. And I'm not the decision maker, but I am happy to do it because I like to be here and I don't mind turning on Lauren helps me with the Zoom. Have volunteers and someone would rather lead it than me. We can rotate leadership. Anything's possible, really. What I don't want to do is just not have this happen because I value this time a lot.
Absolutely.
So,
I do greatly as well.
Me too.
So, all right. Well, God willing, I will see everybody next week.
But
Take
Barb,
care.
David and Barb, did you want to talk? Okay.
Yeah.
just